That's a thrill. That's a thrill to carry it through those 3 gears manually. And it's one of the reasons why this car is a feature in the exhibition in the Audrain Automobile Museum more than American muscle. This is a great and rare example of the height of American muscle in the late 1960s. Style, performance, rarity, the Hurst connection, some of the greatest drag races ever, and performance. This is not your father's Oldsmobile. The late 1960s were a very, very interesting time for the car industry, and certainly here in America. And it's really exemplified by the car I'm driving today, which is a 1969 Oldsmobile 442 Hurst. The Hurst Olds, or the W46 package, was the most powerful performance car you could buy from Oldsmobile at the time, and one of the most powerful performance cars in America. It's well known that General Motors had issued an edict that none of their divisions could put an engine larger than 400 cubic inches in the A body, which is the intermediate body shell, to keep a balance of power and size. But, of course, both Oldsmobile and Buick had 455 cubic inch engines, and the lure to put this engine into the A body was just impossible to resist. And although there's a lot of talk of sort of skullduggery on the part of the Oldsmobile management, that they sort of snuck these cars through by employing an outside firm to actually finish them, doesn't really ring true, because the cars left the factory with the 455 engines in them, and yes, they were all completed at Deming Engineering in Lansing, but it wasn't that they were sort of sneaking the cars out the back door to ignore the General Motors edict. So I'm not quite sure we'll ever know what the true story is, although I think I know some folks at General Motors who are far enough removed for it now that they might have some answers. But nonetheless, this car was released to the public with 380 horsepower. Now, that was pretty stout for 1969, but it's also interesting to see what was happening in terms of performance back then, because there was a steady decline in performance, which of course we all recognized by the time we got to the early 70s. But the first Hurst Olds 442 in 1968 actually had 390 horsepower, and by 1970 there'd be 370 horses under the hood. But again, horsepower is a really interesting thing. All of you have watched this network on a regular basis and seen the videos and me driving these cars, know how I feel about horsepower. Horsepower is really great. It's torque and horsepower and weight that really provides the clue to what a car can do in performance. This car is very much about horsepower, but also about torque. And it's also very, very different from the 1966 Oldsmobile 442 4-speed that Jay and I drove on this channel. You can see that video here. This car is just about approaching the limit of balance in terms of power and this chassis. And it feels completely different than that 1966 442. This seems to be a car that wants to really be king of the drag strip rather than king of the road. The power is very available. You put your foot down and it is there all at once. That ram air hood is quite wonderful. It's actually done in a very interesting and well integrated way, I think. When you think about some of the other wilder ram air or air induction systems that people were using in the late 1960s, this one is very well integrated into the overall design. Now, of course, again, this is an Oldsmobile, and it's not a Chevrolet or a Pontiac, and so much like its Buick brothers, it delivers the performance package in a somewhat more sophisticated way, shall we say. But that's not to say this thing does not scream its presence. All these cars were only available in this color combination of this white and gold, and again, it's very elegant in a way, but also reminds me of the livery on some of the great dragsters of the time. The inside of this car gives very little away to its performance capabilities when you look at the dashboard. For instance, this nice big clock, where I'd sort of love to see a tachometer in a performance car, but nonetheless, you know, we are in an Oldsmobile. But where the clue comes, and the fact that this is a Hurst, is with the gear shift. All these cars are automatic. The GM Turbo Hydromatic 400 transmission, a great transmission, delivers instant kickdown and power when you need it, and very well matched to the power and torque curve of this engine. You also have the choice of the normal park, reverse, neutral, drive, but you have the choice of the side gate, which delivers manual control from first to third. And this attribute was so well considered that they actually have a lockout for it, so that people who didn't want to get involved in that part of the power band of the car didn't have to. Now, we've been cruising around in the normal gate, and I have barely cracked the throttle of this. It's been a slightly wet morning, but most of the roads are dry. And of course, we are always mindful of the local speed limits and regulations, and the people with whom we share the road, the joggers and cyclists. This is a car that just cruises so easily to a high speed. You have to be very, very, very aware of what's happening and how it's going to be delivered. It's so interesting, you know, in 1969, thinking about how power is delivered in a typical European performance car, and this, it's remarkable. It is literally day and night. There is an effortlessness about this power that you could never find in a comparable European performance car. Not long ago, I was in Italy with a great friend who at the time had a 1968 Shelby GT350. And beside the fact that it was horrifyingly expensive for him to keep a car like that in Italy with the cost of gasoline, we took the car to the Coppa Inter-Europea at Monza racetrack from Bergamo, and it just flew down the autostrada. And when we got to Monza and parked in the paddock, it got more attention than any Ferrari around or any Lamborghini. It was absolutely astonishing. And again, it's one of those reasons why this very, very typically American way of delivering power is so attractive to so many Europeans, because it's so different than what European manufacturers typically do. And it's to say that it's very interesting to think of why the power is delivered in the way it is. Again, it's one of those things that the national characteristics of cars, which has almost disappeared now, was so incredibly pronounced in this period. And as I also said, this is a car that loves to go fast in a straight line. It stops pretty well, But the difference in the handling of this 1969 car versus the 1966 is quite dramatic. The 1966 442 really does feel like a big American sports car. This is a big American performance car. It will do the turns because it has to. It's not happiest here, but it does have reserves of power that are unimaginable in so many other cars of this type. It was a very, very special time. I was really coming into awareness of the car world when this car was new, and cars like this were always fascinating and always interesting. And the fact that this car is such an incredibly rare thing also makes it very special. That's the manual shift. And fourth takes you up to the drive. And you'd really have to be very aware of your surroundings here. That's all we can sample on this drive. But it is a beast, an absolute beast. And it also passes the Donald Osborne smile test. This car is talking to me, and I love what it has to say.